The vast emptiness of space held no warmth at the fringes of the Veil Nebulae, a forgotten corner of the galaxy where signals scattered and distorted. The Galactic Council had designated it as a neutral meeting point precisely for this reason: plausible deniability if things went wrong. And given the nature of this first contact, things could very easily go wrong. The UNS Endurance drifted at the edge of the nebula, its utilitarian design reflecting humanity's practical approach to space travel. No unnecessary flourishes, no intimidating weapons or rays bristling from its hull. Just efficient, reliable technology born from centuries of adaptation and survival. The ship's name was no accident. Endurance was humanity's greatest strength, forged in the crucible of Earth, their Deathworld home. On the command bridge, Ambassador Alara Vance stood with perfect posture, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her calm demeanor betrayed nothing of the tension she felt, but her eyes, sharp and calculating, revealed decades of experience navigating the treacherous waters of interspecies diplomacy. She had survived border conflicts, first contact disasters, and the brutal early years of colonizing harsh worlds. This meeting would be just another challenge to overcome. "They're here," announced Communications Officer Rivera, her voice cutting through the tense silence. A massive vessel had appeared without warning at the edge of their sensors. Unlike human ships with their smooth, practical lines, this one was all angles and protrusions, a jagged silhouette against the nebula's glow. Its hull bore scars that hadn't been repaired, worn like badges of honor rather than damage to be fixed. "Cathar design follows function and intimidation," said Security Commander Marcus Reyes, his voice low and gravelly. The man stood slightly behind Vance, his muscular form tense beneath his uniform. Though his face remained expressionless, the scars visible at his collar told stories of survival that most diplomats couldn't understand. No decorative elements. Everything serves a purpose, usually combat. Vance nodded. The council briefing mentioned they evolved on a high-gravity world with constant electromagnetic storms and an ecosystem that makes Australian wildlife look friendly. "Just like us," Reyes muttered. "Deathworlders meeting Deathworlders." "Which is why this meeting is so important," Vance replied. "We need to establish boundaries before accidents happen." The neutral space station, little more than a reinforced meeting module, orbited a barren moon. As the human delegation shuttle approached, they got their first real look at the Cathar. The aliens disembarked from their own transport with deliberate movements, their bodies encased in thick, gray exoskeletons that looked like living stone. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, with multiple sharp-edged limbs and compound eyes that reflected light in disturbing patterns. Their movements were precise and predatory. "They're broadcasting some kind of bioelectric field," whispered Dr. Jian Li, the expedition's xenobiologist. Her instruments were picking up readings that made little sense. "It feels threatening, like standing too close to a predator." Vance felt it too, a primal unease that made her want to flee. She suppressed the instinct. Humanity had not survived Earth by giving in to fear. The largest Cathar, nearly 8 feet tall, with an exoskeleton marked by deep grooves and scars, stepped forward. The translator identified him as War Leader Gorak, though the nuances of the title were probably lost in translation. "You enter Cathar space," Gorak's translated voice crackled through their comms. The translation was functional but stripped of subtlety. Small creatures, with thin shells and weak limbs. Why should Cathar not simply take what you have? Vance stepped forward, maintaining a diplomatic smile despite the blatant threat. "War Leader Gorak, I am Ambassador Alara Vance of the United Earth Alliance. We come in peace to establish diplomatic relations between our species. This region is not claimed territory according to Galactic Council records." The compound eyes shifted, reflecting light in patterns that seemed to indicate confusion or perhaps contempt. "Galactic Council has no authority over Cathar. For take what Cathar need. Strong survive. Weak submit or perish." Reyes tensed beside Vance, his hand drifting toward his sidearm, but Vance gave him a subtle gesture to stand down. Strength takes many forms. War leader, she replied evenly. Humans have survived a Deathworld too, Earth. We understand the value of strength, but we also understand the value of cooperation. Gorik made a sound that the translator couldn't interpret, perhaps laughter, perhaps derision. Your technology lacks direct threat capability. Your bodies lack natural weapons. You speak of peace when you should prepare for war. He stepped closer, towering over. Vance, Cathar have observed. You are not worthy of space you occupy. The other Cathar warriors flanking Gorik shifted their postures, chitinous limbs making scraping sounds against the station floor. The bioelectric field intensified, making the human skin prickle with instinctive alarm. I propose ritual of strength testing, Gorik announced suddenly. Cathar tradition when meeting potential threats or vassals. One warrior from each species fights on neutral ground. He gestured toward a small, rocky planetoid visible through the viewport. Xylos. Hostile environment. Thin, toxic atmosphere. Extreme temperature variations. Metal dust storms. True test of survival. Vance maintained her diplomatic expression, though inside she felt a chill. And the purpose of this test? Simple. Victor proves dominance. Defeated species submits to victor's terms. Gorik's mandibles clicked in what might have been satisfaction. Cathar terms. Humans withdraw from this space sector. Provide tribute of resources and technology to superior species. And if we refuse this challenge? Vance asked carefully. Then Cathar know humans are prey, not worthy of respect. Gorik's posture shifted to something more threatening. Cathar fleet will ensure human compliance. Many human ships will burn. The ultimatum hung in the recycled air of the station. Vance requested a brief recess, which Gorik granted with clear disdain for what he perceived as weakness. Back aboard the Endurance, the command crew erupted into heated debate. We should withdraw, urged Lieutenant Commander Patel, the ship's tactical officer. We don't have the firepower to engage their fleet, and reinforcements are 2 weeks away at best. Withdrawal will be seen as weakness, countered Reyes. They'll pursue an attack anyway. These aren't Signerians or Vega collectives. They respect only force. We should launch a preemptive strike while we have surprise on our side. And start an interspecies war? Vance shook her head firmly. No, the Council would never sanction it. And frankly, neither would I. We don't know enough about their capabilities to risk direct conflict. Then we accept the challenge, Reyes stated, his scarred face grim. I volunteer. I've survived 3 crash landings on hostile worlds and the Proxima Centauri rebellion. Vance studied him thoughtfully. Your combat skills are exceptional, Commander, but this isn't just about fighting. It's about sending a message. She turned to face the entire assembled team. We need to show them a different kind of strength, human strength. Her eyes settled on a quiet figure at the back of the briefing room. Dr. Jianli, you're our foremost expert on survival in hostile environments, correct? The xenobiologist looked startled. Though physically fit, she wasn't imposing, slender with keen, intelligent eyes and hands that moved with precise efficiency. I've spent more time on extreme environment planets than anyone else in the fleet, yes. But Ambassador, I'm a scientist, not a warrior. Exactly, Vance smiled. You're humanity's greatest advantage. Adaptability, resourcefulness, and intelligence. On Earth, we didn't become the dominant species through brute strength. This is insane, Reyes protested. They'll send their strongest fighter. Who will expect to face our strongest fighter? Vance countered. They don't understand us, Commander. That's our advantage. She turned back to Dr. Lee. What do you think? Can you survive against one of them? Jianli considered for a long moment, her mind clearly working through calculations and possibilities. Not in direct combat, she finally said, but in a survival scenario where intelligence and adaptation matter as much as strength? Yes, I believe I can. This is our one chance to change their perception of us, Vance said firmly. We either prove ourselves in their eyes or face conflict on a much larger scale. Dr. Lee is our best option. The decision made, they prepared through the night. While Jianli gathered specialized equipment and studied the limited data they had on Xylos, the others made contingency plans. If this gambit failed, the Endurance would need to retreat and warn Earth about the new threat. The next cycle, Vance informed Gorik of their decision. The Cathar leader's compound eyes flickered with what might have been surprise when Jianli stepped forward as humanity's champion. "This is your warrior?" he asked, mandibles clicking rapidly. "Small female with no visible weapons or armor." "This is Dr. Jianli, our foremost survival specialist," Vance replied calmly. "We accept your challenge." Gorik studied Li with what might have been contempt or confusion. "Cathar champion is Kalen," he finally announced, gesturing to a slightly smaller but still imposing Cathar warrior. Though not as scarred as Gorik, Kalen's exoskeleton gleamed with a darker, more mottled pattern, and his movements were quick and precise. "Kalen is young, but has killed many predators on Catharos," Gorik explained. "We'll be honored to prove human weakness." Kalen stepped forward, the bioelectric field around him pulsing with aggressive energy. He towered over Jianli, who met his gaze steadily. "Challenge begins in 1 rotation," Gorik announced. "Prepare your final wishes, human." Jianli spent her remaining time studying Xylos' conditions through remote sensors. The planetoid was harsh, barely maintaining a thin, toxic atmosphere that would require breathing apparatus. Surface temperatures varied from scorching in direct sunlight to deeply freezing in shadow. The terrain was treacherous, riddled with crevasses, sharp crystal formations, and unstable rock formations. Most concerning were the irregular metal dust storms that could slice through protective gear and foul equipment. She selected her equipment carefully, an environmentally sealed survival suit with reinforced patches, atmospheric filters, thermal regulation, a small medical kit, water recycler, ration packs, sensory equipment, climbing gear, and a few specialized tools of her own design. Each item was chosen for multiple potential uses. "You're not taking weapons?" Reyes asked incredulously when he reviewed her loadout. "Everything is a weapon if you use it correctly," Jianli replied. "And I'm taking these." She showed him several small devices. "Micro-drones, environmental analyzers," she corrected, "with minor modifications." When the time came, both champions were transported to opposite sides of Xylos. The last thing Jianli heard before her comms switched to the limited challenge channel was Ambassador Vance's voice. "Remember, Doctor, you're not just fighting for yourself." The surface of Xylos felt wrong beneath her boots, uneven, with a strange crystalline quality that crunched with each step. The gravity was approximately 0.8 Earth standard, giving her movements a slightly bouncy quality that would take adjustment. Through her faceplate, she could see a landscape of jagged rock formations stretching toward a horizon that came too quickly due to the planetoid's small size. Her first priority was shelter. The Cathar would be hunting immediately, using their superior strength and natural armor to move quickly across the terrain. She needed to establish a defensive position and gather information. Jianli found a narrow crevice leading to a small cave system. After deploying sensors to warn of approach and potential environmental hazards, she set up her base and released 3 micro-drones to map the surrounding 5 kilometers and locate the Cathar champion. The drones returned within 30 minutes. Kalen was moving with purpose across the rocky terrain, covering ground with alarming speed. His exoskeleton provided natural protection against the environment, though Jianli noted with interest that he still carried breathing apparatus. So the atmosphere was toxic even to the Cathar. She studied his movement patterns, noting how he navigated obstacles and periodically seemed to test the air or ground. He was tracking her, she realized. The Cathar had sensory abilities beyond what humans had cataloged. "Time to move," she murmured to herself, quickly packing her essential gear. She left behind a small device in the cave, one of several non-lethal traps she had prepared. The Cathar might be expecting a direct confrontation, but that wasn't the human way. Not her way. As Kalen tracked Jian Li's scent across the barren landscape of Xylos, his frustration grew. The prey was elusive, always moving, never staying still long enough for him to corner it. This was not honorable combat, as Cathar understood it. It was irritating. When he found the cave where she had first sheltered, he charged in without hesitation, expecting to find the human cowering. Instead, a brilliant flash of light and a high-pitched sonic pulse assaulted his compound eyes and sensitive auditory organs. He staggered back, momentarily disoriented, a growl of rage escaping his breathing apparatus. By the time his senses cleared, the human was long gone, and the shame of falling for such a simple trap burned through him. He would not underestimate this strange, weak-looking creature again. Aboard their respective ships, both species watched the unfolding contest with intense interest. On the Endurance, the crew observed through the limited feed from Jian Li's suit cameras and the orbiting sensors they were permitted. "She's leading him in circles," noted Lieutenant Yamamoto, watching the tracking display, "making him waste energy and gathering data on his capabilities with each encounter," added Vance. Classic human strategy. On the Cathar vessel, Gorik watched with growing confusion. This was not how prey behaved. The human moved with purpose, setting traps, using the environment, conserving energy. After Kalen triggered a third trap, this one causing a localized dust storm that forced him to seek shelter for nearly an hour, Gorik summoned his advisors. "The human fights without fighting," he growled. "Is this cowardice or strategy? Perhaps their kind evolved as trap setters," suggested his second-in-command. "Not all predators chase." The thought was disturbing to the Cathar worldview. They valued direct confrontation, the test of strength against strength. This indirect approach seemed dishonorable, yet Gorik couldn't deny its effectiveness. Kalen had yet to land a single blow on the human, while he had been delayed, disoriented, and exhausted multiple times. On Xylos, the deadly game continued. Jianli had established a pattern of movement that kept her ahead of Kalen, while leading him through increasingly difficult terrain. Each encounter was carefully managed, never direct combat, but always a test of her theories about Cathar physiology and psychology. She discovered that their exoskeletons, while nearly impervious to impact, had vulnerable joint areas. Their compound eyes were highly sensitive to certain light frequencies. Their auditory systems, evolved on a world of constant electrical storms, could be overwhelmed by specific sound patterns. Kalen learned too. After each trap, he adjusted his approach, becoming more cautious, studying the ground before proceeding. He began to anticipate her patterns, cutting off escape routes, forcing her to expend more energy to evade him. By the second day, both were showing signs of fatigue. Jianli's oxygen recycler was functioning at reduced efficiency, and a close call with a crystal formation had torn her suit, requiring emergency patching. Kalen's movements had slowed slightly, his breathing more labored as the toxic atmosphere taxed even his specialized respiratory system. The breaking point came during a sudden metal dust storm. These unpredictable meteorological events swept across the planetoid with little warning, carrying particles sharp enough to cut through standard materials. Jianli had been monitoring atmospheric conditions and detected the pressure change in time to seek shelter beneath an overhanging rock formation. Kalen, in his single-minded pursuit, was caught in the open. The storm's edge caught him, not enough to cause serious damage to his exoskeleton, but a sharp metal fragment found the joint in his left leg where the protective plates overlapped. The wound wasn't deep, but it compromised his movement and caused him considerable pain. Limping and enraged, he redoubled his efforts to find the human. Pain was weakness, and weakness was failure in Cathar culture. He would not fail Gorik or bring shame to his lineage. Jianli, meanwhile, had her own crisis. The rock formation she had sheltered under had been weakened by the storm. As she attempted to exit after the dust settled, a section collapsed, partially trapping her beneath a heavy stone slab. Her suit integrity held, but she was pinned, the stone too heavy to push away in the planetoid's gravity. As she struggled to free herself, her sensors alerted her to approaching movement. Kalen had found her, and she was trapped. The Cathar warrior appeared at the entrance to her shelter, his massive form blocking what little light filtered through the dusty atmosphere. Despite his injured leg, he moved with predatory intent, mandibles clicking in what might have been satisfaction. Trapped. The translation came through her comms. Now true test. Strength against strength. Jianli felt her heart racing, but forced herself to remain calm. There are many kinds of strength, she replied, her hand moving slowly to her equipment belt. Kalen advanced, the injured leg dragging slightly, but his other limbs more than capable of finishing her. As he reached toward her, Jianli activated her final device, a modified sonic emitter tuned precisely to the frequency she had determined would most affect Cathar's sensory organs. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Kalen reeled backward, his limbs spasming as the sound disrupted his neural pathways. He crashed against the weakened rock wall, causing further collapse. In the chaos, Jianli activated her personal propulsion device, a small emergency tool designed for zero-G rescue operations. The thrust was just enough to pull her free of the rock slab as the entire structure came down. She rolled clear, battered and scraped, but alive. Kalen was not so fortunate. The collapsing rocks had partially buried him, and the sonic device continued to disrupt his coordination. He thrashed weakly, unable to free himself, the injured leg now pinned beneath a heavy boulder. Jianli stood unsteadily, the propulsion device depleted, her suit torn in multiple places but still maintaining minimum life support. She had a clear advantage. The Cathar was incapacitated, vulnerable. According to the terms of the challenge, she could end it now, a well-placed energy blade or even a sharp rock to the exposed joint areas would finish him. On both ships, tension reached its peak. The Cathar crew watched in stony silence, expecting the execution that their culture demanded. Gorik's mandibles were still, his compound eyes fixed on the feed. On the Endurance, Vance and her team held their breath, knowing that this moment would define humanity in Cathar eyes forever. Jianli limped forward, stopping just beyond Kalen's reach. The Cathar warrior had stopped thrashing and now watched her with what might have been defiance, waiting for the killing blow. Instead, she knelt and examined the rock pinning his injured leg. "What is human doing?" Gorik demanded over the command channel. "Kill or be killed. This is the way." Jianli ignored the communication. With careful movements, she used her climbing equipment to create a lever system and, with considerable effort, shifted the boulder just enough to free Kalen's leg. The joint was clearly damaged, leaking a bluish fluid that might have been the Cathar equivalent of blood. Kalen remained motionless, compound eyes tracking her every move with what could only be described as confusion. When she reached for her medical kit, he tensed, perhaps expecting a weapon, but made no move to attack. From the kit, Jianli extracted a tube of biomedical sealant, designed for emergency suit repairs, but effective on organic material as well. With slow, deliberate movements, she applied it to the damaged joint, sealing the wound and preventing further fluid loss. Stepping back to a safe distance, she finally addressed the communications channel that connected to both ships. "The challenge is complete," she said, her voice steady despite her labored breathing. "You fought bravely, warrior Kalen. But strength isn't only destruction." Silence stretched across the channel. Then Gorik's voice, tense with barely contained rage and confusion. "What trickery is this? Kill enemy or submit. Those are only outcomes." Ambassador Vance's voice cut in smoothly. "War leader Gorik, may I explain human perspective?" "Explain this." "Insult," Gorik demanded. "What you witnessed wasn't weakness, but humanity's greatest strength," Vance said. "We come from a Deathworld too. We understand the need for power and the capacity for violence. But we've learned that real strength is having the power to destroy and choosing not to when our objectives are achieved." "Objectives?" Gorik sounded bewildered. Dr. Lee proved she could survive against her champion. She demonstrated human resilience and adaptability. Killing Kalen would have added nothing to that demonstration. Instead, she showed something more valuable, that cooperation can exist even between natural opponents. The Cathar command channel went silent as Gorik processed this alien concept. After several minutes, he responded, his translated voice slightly less aggressive. Cathar do not understand this. Choice. Mercy is unknown concept. Weak are eliminated, so strong survive. This is natural law. Yet both our species survive death worlds by finding different paths, Vance pointed out. Perhaps there's something to learn from these differences. Another long silence followed. Finally, Gorik announced, "Extraction teams deploy." Challenge concluded. Further discussion required. The next 12 hours were tense. Both champions were retrieved and treated for their injuries. Kalen, once stabilized, requested and was granted permission to meet with Jian Li in the neutral medical bay. No words were exchanged, but the Cathar warriors studied her with what might have been a new kind of respect before returning to his ship. When negotiations resumed on the space station, the atmosphere had transformed. The Cathar delegation, still intimidating in size and bioelectropresence, no longer exuded the same contemptuous hostility. They observed the humans with wary calculation, reassessing everything they thought they knew. Gorik had spent the intervening time reviewing the entire challenge. He studied how Jian Li used the environment, how she analyzed and exploited weaknesses, how she preserved energy and resources. He compared this with Cathar military history, a brutal chronicle of conquest where victory always meant annihilation of the enemy or, when facing superior forces, their own destruction. This human approach was disturbing yet fascinating. It suggested paths his species had never considered, paths that didn't inevitably lead to mutual destruction when equals met. In the final session, with both delegations present and possible distant Galactic Council observers receiving whatever signal could penetrate the nebula's interference, Gorik stood face to face with Ambassador Vance. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited for his decision. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Gorik did something unprecedented in Cathar history. He slowly lowered his upper body and inclined his head forward, a formal bow of acknowledgement. Gasps came from both delegations. For the Cathar, this was shocking, almost sacrilegious. Their leaders bowed to no one. For the humans, the significance wasn't immediately clear, but the reactions of the other Cathar made it obvious this was monumental. Cathar acknowledged humans as worthy adversaries, Gorik stated formally. Not prey, not vassals, equals in different form. The bow wasn't submission. It was recognition, one apex predator acknowledging another. Vance, understanding the gravity of the moment, returned the gesture with equal formality. Humanity acknowledges the Cathar as equals worthy of respect and caution. The ultimatum was withdrawn. In its place, a cautious ceasefire agreement and establishment of a demilitarized zone were negotiated. A limited communication channel would be maintained to prevent future misunderstandings. The relationship remained fragile, suspicious, but a door had been opened that neither side had anticipated. As the human delegation prepared to depart, Gorik approached Vance one final time. Humans fight like demons, but show restraint. This is new concept for Cathar. It took us thousands of years to learn it ourselves, Vance admitted. Earth taught us that even apex predators must adapt or perish. Cathar will consider this lesson, Gorik replied. His compound eyes shifted in patterns that the translators couldn't interpret. The universe became more complex today. As the Endurance departed the nebula, leaving the Cathar to their own reflections, the bridge crew maintained a thoughtful silence. Eventually, Commander Reyes broke it. "Do you think it will last?" he asked. "This peace." Ambassador Vance gazed at the view screen where the Cathar vessel was growing smaller in the distance. "Peace is always fragile, Commander, but understanding, that can be more durable." She turned to where Dr. Lee stood, still bandaged but recovering well. "And today we found understanding in the most unlikely place. Between two Deathworld species," Jian Li nodded. One bowed, not out of weakness, but out of recognizing a strength they'd never imagined. Throughout the galaxy, other species would soon update their understanding of Deathworld species, particularly humans, who fought like demons but possessed a strategic compassion that was, in its own way, terrifying. The question that remained was whether the Cathar could learn from this encounter or would revert to their old ways. But one thing was certain: when two Deathworld species met, one had bowed, not from weakness, but from recognizing a kind of strength they had never imagined possible.